Look at some stuff, and it's kind of weird because what we're looking at here basically is something that's unique. And basically this is a hard thing to look at because when you try to look at stuff, they don't want to tell you stuff at first. They don't want to tell you. This is what happened to the world currency. This is what happened to the world currency, okay? That's the Swiss. The green line is the Swiss. This black dotted line, that's the US dollar. This is everybody else's currency. Basically everybody else's currency in the world. Now, why was this happening? Well, in order to understand that, we've got to go like way back and start looking at these different graphs. And it's kind of hard because you end up having these different types of ways that banking institutions want to talk about how everything worked in certain ways to understand certain things. And, it's kind of hairy actually because they show you a lot of weird stuff. But when you start looking at raw data and adding numbers up, it doesn't seem like it adds up. So you end up looking at all this different stuff, and eventually you're like, well, wait a minute, this doesn't look like it makes sense. What's going on here, because it takes a long while to get them to admit the reality of what actually was transpiring. Because you're hearing a lot of stuff that occurred in World War II, World War I between and World War II, and they'll talk about the dollar and gold. They talk, well, the gold, da 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 da. Well, that's interesting. Supposedly, the United States ends up with 70% of the gold, setting an official value rate of $35 per ounce. Okay, that's great. Except they told everybody, oh, you have to turn in your gold. Let me explain this to you. They said the gold is officially $35 an ounce. So they're setting that, right? But at the same time, they're saying, oh, by the way, nobody is allowed to exchange gold. How about that? Nobody is allowed to exchange gold. So people think gold was this exchange. They're like, oh, well, gold was the exchange and all this different stuff, blah, 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 blah. And the reality is, you then see another document. No, they were demanding people turn it in. They were going to places where people had purchased gold and they were holding it in their safe deposit boxes and banks, and they were raiding the banks and taking it, which means you couldn't buy gold. And then see another document, well, yeah, you couldn't buy gold. So in other words, when they're telling you it's an official exchange rate, it's meaningless. It's meaningless because nobody was allowed to exchange gold. So what ends up happening is the US dollar becomes a constant line. The actual reality is the US dollar becomes a constant line. And that is because basically the decision was, we are not going to allow the dollar to be devalued. So if you say, oh, well, we want to recompute it to do this, and they said, no, we are not going to allow any devaluation of the dollar. So, you have to go through the statistics a lot of different ways, and people are going to show you all this fancy stuff, all this neat fancy stuff, all these algorithms, all this neat stuff. And it's really sad that if you jump around and you work your butt off to do all these statistics and come out with finally understanding that, oh, well, this law was passed. Oh, this rule was passed. Oh, by the way, it was decided, all these other things, and you finally get around to where you add them all up. And the truth is, nobody was allowed to sell gold. America was the Roach Motel. Okay? It became the big, huge Roach Motel with the exception of Switzerland. Okay, you see Switzerland? This is the green line. Okay, green line, yeah, Swiss francs. Okay, so the green line is what? Why is it that everybody else's dollar in the whole world basically became virtually worthless. So you have a lot of people that'll show you all these really neat graphs, and they'll talk about this dollar or this franc or this increment and all this other stuff. But then you look at postcards and letters and firsthand accounts, and you run into, at first they wanted to give us 30 cents on the dollar less of our incremental currency, and then it was 70% less, and then they wouldn't take it. How about that one? All over the world, it's like, oh, they don't actually want to admit what's going on, but by the way, they won't actually take other people's currency. So here you had businesses all over the place that just says, no, want nothing to do with anybody else's currency. And they would say, do you have gold? Do you have silver? And yet people in restaurants and stuff, they're like, oh, wow, sign at the door. We only take gold. I don't know what a kind of effect that is. And you don't hear about it much. You don't hear the truth about that. And in many places, people didn't even post signs. It's like you came in and they asked you, and they says, oh, what are you going to be using to pay? We'll get you a table. What are you going to be using to pay? When you order, here's a menu. What are you planning on paying with? Oh, we have yada yada. Oh, we're so sorry, we don't accept that. Oh, well, we have some of this. Oh, we're so sorry, we don't accept that either. Oh, well, what about this? No, we're so sorry, we don't accept it. This is a horror. This is a horror story that occurred in these various times. World War I, World War II, different times, different places. So you had people that would go places and all of a sudden realize whatever currency they had, the business wasn't going to take it. So the only way they could get a meal was to pull their jewelry off, literally, or pull silver. You got any silver or gold coins on you, pull those out. And, so basically, it's of key importance to understand that as you sit there looking at all these financial analyst work, you have to look at the historical information as well to understand what's actually going on. And people say, oh, no, it wasn't that way. He says, yeah, but we got these postcards right here. In this particular town, they wrote about it. It says, we have a whole bunch of currency, but nobody wants to accept it. And so we'll say, oh, well, that was just in that one place. And then you have other people. Now your conspiracy people go, that's because they're lying. It's all fraud. They're lying. And so you have those people. But the reality is that the United States fixed a point and said, no devaluation of the dollar is allowed, period. So when you had these people trying to say, oh, we're changing this price and that price, and they go, based on who? Oh, well, it's been decided in France. Well, France is in Germans' hands. Yeah, but it's been decided we want to do it this way. No. Yeah, no devaluation, no. So what actually happened was, and I'll tell you the truth here. What actually happened in many cases is you literally had American connected banks and various entities that said, no, if we'll accept U.S. dollars. People were like, we don't have any U.S. dollars. We're over here. And, when the trade was coming and you had people coming in, they wanted to do trade. Oh, well, we'll do this deal and that deal. But we want to pay in blah, blah, blah. No, we're accepting U.S. dollars. Well, we don't have any. Well, you'll have to find some place to exchange them. So you had people all over the place trying to exchange currency to get U.S. dollars, and guess what? They couldn't do it. So, here's one of the things. You have people start telling you that you can't control the price of the dollar because, oh, well, they did the gold. I want to almost say BS, okay? BS, okay? Because the gold wasn't exchanged out. You see, the United States became what? A roach motel. a roach motel. The government said, yeah, we'll buy all your gold and give you 35 bucks an ounce. So when you had people that would, businesses, and someone says, well, we got a ship right here full of product, we want to sell it. Yeah, we got a whole cargo ship, we want to sell it. And they go to sell it, and somebody says, oh, great, yeah, that's great, okay. In US dollars, we'll equate that comes out to this amount. And they go, well, we don't have any, we have this currency. Nope. Oh, what about this currency? Nope. What about this? 30 currencies. Go right down the list. Nope. Don't take none of those. US dollars. And they're like, well, we don't like that computation. And they're like, well, they go, oh, we have gold. Oh, well, yeah, here's the thing. Gold is good. Gold, good. Silver, yeah, good. But you got to go over here to the government and have them exchange it for you. And it's 35 bucks. It's a fixed rate. Because, and by the way, we're only accepting US dollars. So you had all of these ships coming from all over the world. You had people with letters, with telegraphs that wanted to do business from all over the world and sell their products. And all of a sudden, you had a situation where people said, oh, no, we want the equivalent of 200 US dollars for that. And people would equate it out and go, no, it's not worth that. And people say, well, what are you going to, and they go, well, what do you think it's worth? And they look at it and they go, well, to us, the average going rate on that is about $28 US. It's a standard figure. It's a fair figure. It's basically what everybody else's stuff is going for of that type of item. We'll give you 28 bucks. And they're like, oh, well, we'll pay you in these currencies. No, we want US dollars. And they'd be sitting there going, we don't have any US dollars. You had all these countries screaming, So they're going to go to that Brentwood or whatever it was. They have this big, huge meeting. And they here's what they put out. They says, we've all decided to go with the dollar. We've turned in all of our currency, and it's all now the dollar. It's all the dollar. And so the United States doesn't exactly play with it, but they say, yeah, we're taking measures and we're absorbing this or that or we're other. But here's the problem. The problem is what was being said by some people one way was not what was actually happening. Because what was actually happening was people were getting letters and postcards that said, nobody will exchange the foreign currency for US dollars. They won't do it. So all of a sudden, anyone who had gold had to somehow use gold or silver is what they had to do. And basically they had to sell it to the United States. The only takers were pretty much the United States. Well, there were some areas like Great Britain had some certain areas where they had exchanges, where they had, connections and stuff. And so if you could find certain types of British ports, you were good to go. It would be all good to go. So this is one of the weird things that some people don't understand, is that you can decide to say, we're not going to allow anyone to devalue the dollar. And people are like, well, how does that work? Well, in a way, it's like tariffs. It's like tariffs because you have people that all of a sudden, they have a whole lot of product. They want to bring it into port. And they say, yes, we want this many US dollars for this item. And someone says, hey, last month that item was $100 and now you're saying it's $140. And they're like, well, yeah, that's what it is. And they turn around and they go, no, we're not going to devalue the US dollar. Plain and simple. We refuse to do it. And you'd have people say, well, we can't do that. We're not going to do that. And they said, fine, take your shipload of goodies and go find another port someplace in the world. Well, in World War II, nobody knew what to do because nobody else would take anybody else's currency. The Japanese took over a bunch of countries. The Germans took over a bunch of countries, and the Russians took over a bunch of countries. So guess what? Nobody wanted any of those currencies from any of those countries. And guess what? Nobody wanted German currency either. They didn't want no German currency. They didn't want Russian currency. All the it's like what? Yeah. Yeah, because you had people look at it and says, well, this war, we're not sure how this war thing's going to come out. Is that the truth? Is that the reality? Uh, well, actually, we think the one country that's going to survive is obviously the United States. Oh, you think the United States is going to be the country that for sure is going to survive? And it's like, well, how do you figure that? Oh, well, if the Germans keep going and the Japanese keep going, all the other countries are going to send all their air forces and navies and all their assets to the United States and make it this incredible superpower. They'll withdraw all their armies, all their forces, and then the United States will be like super reinforced, and it'll be impossible to invade and take over the United States. Oh, really? You think that pretty much? Ah, okay, great, great. So you had all kinds of people all over the world that were trying to sell stuff, and they could no longer play, well, it's a market variance. Yeah, we're going to have to devalue your dollar. Nope, nope. So you can actually say, boom, freeze the dollar price. And people go, well, how does that work? He says, you just won't devalue it. And everyone says, yeah, we can't devalue it. Which means if somebody comes in and says, well, we're changed the price of this product, it's gone up in value. And someone says, well, the last time you came in with it, it was this price. Now you're asking us to devalue the dollar. We can't do that. It's not allowed. It's against the law. And they'll go, oh, well, I guess we're not going to do business. And people sit there and look at them and say, wow, that's amazing. I guess you get to turn your ship around and leave, right? You got another country you can sell all that stuff to? And right now you've got a lot of other countries that would probably buy other things. But what do you think's going to happen? What do you think's going to happen when something like that goes down? Do you think that the next country they go to, they show up and they're going to go, well, actually, these are perfectly good goods. All this stuff is wonderful. Yeah, except we're not sure where to sell it. That would take a while. This would flood our entire market area. Would you take 50 cents on the dollar? Yeah. So, but yeah, wait a minute. It says, well, we'll offer you half of what the Americans were offering you. What? Yeah, what? So that all of a sudden is that situation when you end up having people that realize, welcome to reality. So when you hear people talk about the dollars getting devalued, you can say, well, kind of, sort of, we've got all this so-called market fluctuation, but you know what? At any given point, the government can say, no, we're not going to allow the devaluation of the American dollar. And other people say, well, they'll take all their products someplace else. And a lot of people in the country go, good, go ahead and do that. And people go, oh, that's horrible. That'll screw trade all up. But some people have no idea, again, how that works. What happens if all of a sudden you realize that 30% of all the goods in the world are coming to the United States? Okay. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, we don't want to sell it for, we want more money for it. And we say, we're not devaluing the dollar. And all of a sudden 30%, that 30% now has to be divided up all over the world. Now all of a sudden, again, they're going to take these ships, they're going to try to go to ports around the world. Guess what? They're going to constantly have people say, oh man, we can't accept that many goods. That floods the market. We'll give you 50 cents on the dollar for it. Yeah, we got some speculators. And some people might say, oh man, no, okay, well, we'll just do it one time. Maybe they hem and haw. Oh, come on, you got to give us a better deal than that. We just left port over this. And he says, yeah, the Americans were offering you 80 cents on the dollar, but you tried to jam them and devalue the American dollar, and they said, no, we're not going to go for that. And now you come over to us, and we're like, man, we're not equipped to intake all that stuff. We already got our orders full to the brim of what we want. That's all surplus stuff. We just have to stack it in warehouses until we can sell it. Best, again, for us, the best from our point of standpoint, best we can do is 50 cents on the dollar. So all of a sudden you have people that are stuck with that. Now here's the catch. Do they say, nope, we're going to spend more money, more fuel, we're going to go try to find another port? Are you endlessly going to start having your ships running around the world looking for another port? Because guess what? The next country they go to might say, yeah, we're a bit smaller. Wow, you got all that stuff. Wow, brand new. That looks really wonderful. Yeah, our warehouses are already full. We already had some ships come in already. And man, we just bought a whole bunch of stuff. We got so much surplus stuff right now. It's amazing. Man, the best we could do is maybe give you 30 cents on the dollar. And they're like, but we just spent 8% bringing it down here. Yeah, I guess you guys, you tried to raise the price and devalue the U.S. dollar, and they told you no. And you guys, I guess, decided to take your business someplace else. And now it's just getting worse and worse with each stop. And then, so you're having this cycle, more and more ships coming in, more and more ships coming in. And all of a sudden they start going to other people and it becomes 50 cents on the dollar, 30 cents on the dollar, 20 cents on the dollar. Eventually what happens is you have people says, look, it's not that your goods are perfectly good, but look, here, let me show you these warehouses. See these warehouses? We got a 10-year supply of this stuff. We don't need it, man. 10 cents on the dollar is the best we can help you out with. That's what ends up happening. That's what ends up happening. So don't believe for 1 minute that you can't say, nope, we're not going to allow anyone to devalue the American dollar. I'm telling you. I'm telling you, because the American dollar, we can decide at any given moment and say, no devaluation of the dollar allowed at all. We are going to stay constant, and that's it. And everybody else's dollars are going to fluctuate around ours. Everyone's going to fluctuate around our stuff. We're staying the steady course. So, that's why most people will measure the American dollar versus anything else. But so, that's the thing. So when you have these different people playing these games, the simplicity is, that's really interesting. Does this have to do with an actual trade of goods? Do you have are you bringing in shiploads of product? So all of a sudden, and people are like, we're going to get mad. Why would you get mad? You just says no devaluation. These people want to raise the price 40%. We said no devaluation. All of a sudden, it's like, wait, what? We just did the tariff stuff. Now you want to freeze the dollar and say no devaluation of the dollar allowed. So all of a sudden it's like people are like, wait a minute, how does that work? Well, you think about it. If people want to start taking and flooding the products all over the world, they can do that. It's their products. They can do whatever they want with them. Anything they want to do with them, they can do with it. So when you say, no, we're not going to devalue our dollar, we're solid. That's it, period. End of story. So this is something where you can put your foot down.